as the last president George Bush put it in Rio, the American way of life is not for sale. Well, he said, I'm not the president of the world, I'm here to defend American interests. And of course, American interests means American business interests, and therefore we're caught in a system where we created these massive corporate structures, and that's another dimension related. It's essentially how it's related to climate change, because there was a recent study again looking at the membership of the corporate boards of the leading banks and corporations. It's a small number of people sitting on each other's boards, and together this sort of small, close-knit group, through 147 corporations, controls over 40% of the entire wealth of the planet, of the entire GDP of the planet. There's been a concentration of power and wealth in structures that have no mandate other than to create additional profits for their shareholders, and nothing about being of service, or nothing about being good for human well-being, or anything like that. And even the most moral people are trapped in that system. There are corporate leaders who are seriously concerned about sustainability and our planning to do things and so on, but their margin for maneuver is so limited because the shareholders and the institutional ones, they're out there. How much more can we get out of our interest rates to please, whether it be their pension funds or whether the sovereign wealth funds or whatever it is they're managing? We're trapped in a system of different logics, which has become suicidal. So all of these things are interrelated. You could talk about climate change, and I can say much more about climate change, but we can also look at biodiversity loss. We can look at water shortages. We could look at many other toxic chemicals that are being produced in enormous quantities. Anybody wants to admit that they could be dangerous and so on. I had perhaps the misfortune, for a decade my job in the United Nations was to coordinate all the world's efforts to monitor and assess the global environment and to warn governments of new problems that were coming. So I was reasonably central to setting up the observing systems for climate change and working with the scientists and with the satellite missions that were being planned and so on to try to get a picture of what was happening. If I hadn't been a Baha'i, I think I would have been very depressed. Too bad I had children. What kind of world am I leaving them to, and so on. Because all the scientific evidence is looking pretty grim. And in fact, when I was a young scientist, I actually did a book review, a book called The Limits to Growth, which was written by the Club of Rome. Some of you who are of my age might remember that far back. These young, MIT scientists did a computer model of the world system and where it was heading, and basically they said that things would go pretty well until about 2015, 2020, and then we'd have a collapse in civilization. And then they updid that model for the Earth Summit in 1992, the Rio Earth Summit, and the book that they published then was called Beyond the Limits. As they said, we may already have overshot the limits, but because of the time lags in the natural systems, we haven't yet seen the results. But already, the overshoot and collapse syndrome that we see in ecological systems, among species, seem to be taking place, at the human level. They did another update in 2004, which was the 30-year update, which said none of the conclusions have changed. There was a recent study done by, because Daniel Levens, who led that, and with whom I also worked on indicators for a number of years, they recently updated and said we're following right along the curves that were predicted by those models. The only things, there's slight differences. We've done a little better on death rates and birth rates than they predicted, but apart from that, everything is tracking right on schedule. And the only thing that has changed, according to the most recent study last year, is that the options of a sustainability outcome are no longer reasonable options. Not very encouraging for the years immediately ahead. Then there was a study that just came out by an American biologist who specialized in mathematical models of population behaviors. And he's well known in his field as the best of the mathematical modelers doing these complex models of these systems. And in mid-career he got sort of bored, I've done this for enough species now, it's not interesting anymore, what else can I do? What has somebody not yet modeled mathematically? And he said, history. Nobody had done mathematical models of history. So he said, let me model the rise and fall of civilizations, and see what that tells us. And so he said he took as his basic indicator social cohesion. That a civilization comes together because people are working together, they have a sense of solidarity, and so on. And so you see signs of total cohesion, and the civilization advances. If you see increasing violence and so on, then you're losing cohesion, and then it looks like it may be, on the way down. And so he was able to find data sets that he could trace for long enough periods of time, for the Roman Empire, for medieval Europe, I think for something in Tsarist Russia, the Maya civilization, a number of relatively long time sets. And he found the most significant cycle was about a 200-year cycle, in which you have a growth in the size of the population, and generally also an increase in technological innovation, new ways of creating wealth. So you have wealth being created by an increasing number of people. And you have the governing elite, the dominant elite, sucking that wealth out from the people and getting richer and richer. And this process goes on until you reach a point at which the population grows beyond the level of resources or level of the technology. So you have excess labor, which allows the elite to push the people down more and more into poverty because of the competition for the jobs that are left, and to become richer and richer. But the poor never revolt. It's not them who revolt to turn against the elite. It's only a generation later, when the young people of the elite are also being excluded and are falling down into poverty. But they have the education, they've seen what it is like, they know what they're missing. They're the ones who then attack and destroy the elite, the civilization collapses, and the cycle begins all over again.
It did happen in the Roman Empire, that scenario.
And so he then said, what does this say about our present society? And so he said, I'm putting my career on the table. I think we're going to see a revolution and collapse in America by 2020. He said that we're just at that point in the cycle where wealth has been concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, where you have these masses of young people who can't find jobs, who don't have the opportunities that previous generations had, don't have hope, and it's from them that will come, the uprising, and that will then follow on into Europe and so on and so forth, and around the world.
So the Occupy Wall Street effort is like the prologue, the beginning.
Yeah, yes, the signals are there already. We've already seen the little bits in the Arab Spring and so on. The world's becoming increasingly unstable. With the struggles in Europe now, where suddenly all the young Greeks are leading Greece because they have no hope for the future in Greece, and the young Spaniards are leading Spain, and so on. It's happening in bits and pieces, but we can already see that this overshooting collapse behavior that comes from scientific observations of biology also seems to apply to the human system.
Who was this man who did that model?
I think his name is James. I'll have to look at my computer. I've got the. If I speak with my slides, I have all the references there. But on a beautiful day like this, you don't speak with your slides. I could show you the curves and show you the details if you really want to be depressed.
Sorry, we'll take your word for it.
The data is there.
We can laugh with you.
No, but of course, what this means is that, and there was an interesting statement from the head of the European Central Bank in, I guess it was 2009, saying that, economics can't tell us where we're going. The past is no longer a basis for planning the future. We're lost. We don't know what we're doing. Now, this is one of the world's top economists who's saying and yet we've been listening to economists for the directions of our civilization now for several decades. We're caught in a materialist society, the consumer society, where we have to keep buying, in order to keep the economy going. And because you aren't creating enough wealth, you have to keep borrowing in order to keep buying. And so we have massive levels of debt that are accumulating. There was in last June, we had a global ethics forum in Geneva with a number of leading experts. One was a banking expert who basically said, if you look at the inside the banking system, look at the inside the financial system, today 97% of the world's money supply was not emitted by governments as their official currencies. It was created by the financial system as layers and layers of debt. They loan money they don't have, and then they loan more money they don't have, and so on. And it just accumulates layers and layers of debt. And if you look at a productive investment, over 90% of the borrowing isn't productive investment, it's in speculation or consumption.
So it's not manufacturing.
And only 8% of investment is actually going to the real economy and producing real wealth. So, as there was one figure I saw was the total value of all the financial derivative products created in the financial system was somewhere in the order of $750 trillion. They're making enormous bonuses buying and selling these things that have absolutely no reality behind them. And so it's a house of cards, ready to collapse. And I mention this because I've come to the conclusion that the only thing that could save us from climate change would be a rapid financial collapse. If the world financial system collapses and trade comes to a halt, then we would stop consuming the remaining fossil fuels, and maybe there's a chance of avoiding runaway climate change.
Well, I'll just interrupt slightly,
please do.
because there was a massive clearing in the skies when America was attacked. The Americans did, wasn't they? Because they suddenly stopped flying airplanes for 3 or 4 days.
And you saw immediate change in solar radiation, and so
Right.
the pollution levels changed. So. Yeah, the
We
environment,
could-
the environment, the air
As long as we
pollution,
can survive,
lots
as long
of
as we've got food.
yeah. Well, of course, the challenge there is that so much of agriculture has become dependent on fossil fuels. Everything, the fertilizers are made with fossil fuels, the pesticides are made with petrochemicals, and the plows are driven by tractors running on diesel, and so on and so forth. Can we rescale agriculture to a more human level quickly enough? Or what does this mean? There is a whole series of concerns and challenges there with respect, and the pessimists. People like James Lovelock, who developed the Gaia hypothesis, some decades ago, said a couple of years ago that he expected the world population in 2100 to be 1 billion people or less. Now that's the pessimist view of where society is going in this century. I think. And the question is, I sort of raise it from a Baha'i perspective, how much can we save? What can we do to turn the society around before we go down that steep, slippery slope towards chaos and collapse and so on and so forth? And while I know that the title of those sort of global solutions, I think the most fundamental global solution is a change at the local level. We need to change the spirit of community in which we're living. Because in any of those scenarios of potential collapse or difficulties or economic problems or whatever in the years ahead, in those communities where the rich and powerful are used to grabbing it, or the strong will grab whatever they can because they have the guns and so on and so forth, and too bad for the poor, you will have chaos and anarchy and blood flowing in the streets. If there's a spirit of community of people working together, saying, how do we solve our problem? Who knows how to grow potatoes? Who knows? How do we work together to find our way through this difficulty? There's I think a reasonable chance, of surviving. And so I think that if one would say, in the light of the scientific evidence that our civilization is not going to go on forever and ever to keep growing, in blissful joy and happiness with all the latest brand names and so on and so forth, as the advertisements portray, the ideal future, then clearly we need to say we have to start building our communities in some different way on a different set of values. And that's exactly what the Baha'is are trying to do right now, is in fact to build that sort of society.